Folks will probably still be trickling in. My name is Jason Smith. I'm the Executive Director for the Michigan Center for Youth Justice, and we want to welcome you all to our webinar focused on the impacts of juvenile court fines and fees in Michigan. October is actually Youth Justice Awareness Month, or Action Month, excuse me. And it's a month where issues within the juvenile justice system are highlighted across the country. In every state, there's events and activities where people can learn about how their juvenile justice system works, and also any kind of issues that need support or reform within it. And this year, the Michigan Center for Youth Justice, we focused on the Debt-Free Justice Campaign to acknowledge the impacts of fines and fees on young people who come in contact with the juvenile justice system, and then highlight all the work that's being done statewide and also locally to eliminate the assessment and collection of juvenile court fines and fees across the state. So in a moment, I'm going to kick it to our wonderful guests, panelists, to introduce themselves, and then we'll start our conversation. I'll be the moderator today. Just before I do, a couple of notes. Our event's planning to go until 7:30. We'll see how the conversation goes and any questions that come from the audience. And I believe that you can include questions in the Q&A, or is it in the chat? I'm sorry, I should have asked that first. But I think one of the options below, either the Q&A or the chat box, you can use to ask questions along the way, and we'll get to them when we get to that portion, or we can, if there's some that connect with the person speaking, we can try to get them to answer in real time. So before I do, I just wanted to say a little bit about MCYJ, the Michigan Center for Youth Justice. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that's focused on juvenile justice policy reform in the state of Michigan. Our mission is to support, or I should say, we work to advance equitable youth justice policies and practices that protect young people and help them achieve their full potential. We just changed our mission recently. And our vision is a fair and effective justice system for Michigan's children, youth, and young adults. And so we really want to make sure that young people who come into the contact with the juvenile justice system are not harmed in any way, or receive rehabilitative treatment. They're in treatment and services that engages them and their families, but also puts them on a pathway to thrive even when they're not court involved. And so that's why we've been really passionate about around this issue of juvenile court fines and fees. We feel like it really aligns with our mission. We believe that fines and fees, when assessed to families, can be harmful, can get in the way of a rehabilitative or treatment-focused relationship between them and the juvenile court, their staff, the treatment providers, and it also can have long-term impacts on that young person and their families, both their dynamic and their financial situation, even after court involvement ends. And so for the last a couple of years, we have been doing public education events like this, working in local communities to support them as they make reforms. And so you'll hear from Nicole Folds, a court administrator, to give an example in her community, but then also to support the advancement of statewide legislation to reform and eliminate this practice statewide. And so we will include some links in the chat box around actions that you all could take, but know that there is currently legislation in the House Bills 498.7 through 499. I think we actually got that cut off. We'll get that last House bill, but there's several House bills. It's a bipartisan bill package They're awaiting a hearing in the House Judiciary Committee, and so we're hoping that after the election, during the lame duck session before the year ends, that legislation will be taken up, and it has a lot of work to do to advance to the governor's desk by the end of the year. But we hope that with your support that we can get the legislators to take it up and advance it through the committee house and then on to the Senate so that it could eventually meet the governor's desk. If it doesn't, the plan is to just reintroduce the legislation. The bill sponsors who support the legislation are very supportive. There was a juvenile justice task force that was established by the governor that looked at a range of issues in the juvenile justice system, but in their final recommendations also included a recommendation to eliminate the assessment and collection of juvenile court fines and fees, and also to discharge the debt, the existing debt of young people who have current fees, which mirrors the legislation language. So we're hoping with that additional recommendation, with the support of all the various stakeholders that were behind it, that can be the extra momentum that we need to advance the legislation. So enough talking from me. Let me kick it to our wonderful panelists to introduce themselves. If you could just share your name and organization and role, a little bit about your work, and then we'll get into specific Q&As. So I'll start with Miranda first.
Hello, everyone. Hi, my name is Miranda Sheffield. I work with the National Center for Youth Law, pronounced she, her, hers. I'm happy to be on the call, and I'm happy that Jason and the rest of the folks at MCYJ invited me to be a part of this. My official title is the Debt-Free Justice Campaign Coordinator for the National Debt-Free Justice Campaign. And I'm excited to be on the call. I'll pass it over to Nicole.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Falds. I'm the Juvenile Court Administrator in Macomb County. And I've been with the court for 21 years and in my current role since 2011. And essentially, I'm responsible for overseeing all of the court operations. And so that includes probation programming, community-based programming, residential placement referrals for youth, attorney appointments, file maintenance, and collections. So thank you for having me.
Thank you both for being here. All right, so we will start with Miranda. As some of the attendees heard, she's not feeling too well, so we want to make sure that she has some time to rest. So Miranda, if you could start us off, could you share a bit about some of the work that's happening nationally to remove fines and fees in the juvenile justice system?
Yes, absolutely, Jason. So as some of you may not know, just a little bit about the Debt-Free Justice Campaign. The Debt-Free Justice Campaign officially kind of launched and kicked off last fall as a national effort to address fines and fees. And the thing is this work has been done a lot through the adult pathway for a lot of adults and things like that, but we really wanted to hone in on focusing how it impacts the juvenile legal system. And the folks who are a part of this work is ourselves, the National Center for Youth Law. We also have another co-partner, the Juvenile Law Center, and then another person who's a part of our steering committee is Berkeley Policy Advocacy Clinic. And so our whole goal with this work is to abolish all fines and fees across all 50 states. And the way that we do this work and the way that we attempted to address this issue is to use litigation with the folks who are part of our team, to use advocacy, to use policy advocacy, and then also to use organizing as a strategy to uplift how this issue particularly impacts Black and Brown communities. And what we've been able to do so far is Michigan is a great example. It looks different in different municipalities and areas. What we've been able to do is, in some cases, we've been able to do like a state repeal where it's kind of like the golden standard where it's like not just getting fees and fines eliminated, but we're also getting it backtracked. So like some states like Pennsylvania, states like California have been able to push forward legislation that includes a little bit of everything in it to help address this issue. And that's really how we've been moving forward. That's how we moved forward with being able to do the things around fines and fees. And then also another thing that I think is really important to lift up, why I'm excited that y'all are having this call during this month, is that we really aim to push for youth and family engagement within our campaign and really lifting up having our young folks be the ones and the families directly impacted, helping us to strategize, to name how to go forward with this campaign. What are some great ideas that we can put forward based on the folks who are directly impacted by it? So I would kind of use that as a way just for folks who may not be aware of this campaign to understand what it looks like.
Okay. And we know that mobilizing to advance this work is not easy, Miranda. So what would you say are best practices that you've seen advocates take in other states to overcome challenges at the state level for legislative reform?
What I think, thank you for that question, Jason. I think what I've been able to see is like some great strategies is kind of building out a coalition of folks who care about this issue. So that could look like, I see we have Nicole. Nicole is someone who works in the courts. There's can be people who are directly working within that system, attorneys, community advocates, stakeholders, youth, being able to bring together a coalition of people who know about this issue has been a great strategy. We've also been able to see direct testimony has also been really effective. So having the people who've been directly affected by this be able to go and do testimonials with the different legislators has also been another powerful tool. And then also I would say strategic storytelling and the use of media. A lot of times, a lot of people in the community do not know about these issues. So being able to have opportunities where people could read about this and find out about people in their communities who are impacted by this is real. Because I think what happens, and a lot of times with this is that we don't know always kind of some of the other ways that when issues of harm happens in communities, how we can address it. So a lot of times what the fines and fees work is doing is really talking through like the possibilities of other ways that we can address harm when it happens in our communities, rather than it being this punitive system that we see across the board. Has not been an effective tool when there's different challenges that take place with young folks in their communities.
Thanks. Is there any point? I feel guilty holding you when you're not feeling well, so I want to let you go. But
Okay,
is there any other points that you really want to drive home today about debt-free justice?
I think for me, it's there's a historical legacy of fines and fees. It comes from somewhere. It's not just something that kind of happened, and we can connect that in a lot of different ways. And I think that, a lot of the challenges that are being faced with young folks is not just what we're doing right now to address this issue is not just for today, it's really for the future of the youth that are coming up, and what's going to be taking place for them. And I would say, as a national campaign, we're always looking to find intersections if anything, I want to drive home that fines and fees do not exist within a bubble. A lot of the people who are directly affected by fines and fees within these various systems are also being faced with poverty, housing issues, environmental issues, issues related to so many other areas. And I think we have to, as advocates and folks, have to do a great job of lifting that up, that this campaign is not just a campaign that only aims to just unravel and abolish fines and fees, but we also want to address these other systems of harm that is causing this issue to continue in the way that it does.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we throughout the last couple of years, we've talked to a lot of young people and a lot of families about this issue, and just some of the stories we heard, especially during the pandemic, when there was a lot of financial uncertainty for many families. We heard stories from families who were struggling to make car payments because they had juvenile court debt. There were families who had a job, were on payment plans. One of the things about Michigan's juvenile justice system is because it's decentralized to the most extent and county based. A lot of the policies and practices will vary depending on the jurisdiction, on the court, and so there are juvenile courts who charge for a range of things. It could be attorney fees. For community-based treatment, so let's say substance abuse treatment in the home or anger management or whatever the young person is court ordered to do treatment-wise, drug testing, things like that, or like an ankle monitoring if a young person has to have increased monitoring at home, but also the cost of out-of-home care, which can be extremely costly. And there are some counties who charge a lot of those fees in over a range of categories, or some that don't charge at all. And one of the issues that we try to work on here in Michigan, which is really important to us, is the concept of justice by geography, where a young person's experience with the juvenile justice system can vary greatly depending on where they are. So you can commit the same offense in one community and not be assessed any financial charges, and then in another county be charged. You can run the gamut. So our goal is to standardize things a bit more, and by doing so, hopefully eliminating this practice from happening. Miranda, feel free to stay, but I know that you're feeling under the weather, so I don't want to keep you. I just want to say thank you very much for supporting our work, but then all the work that you're doing across the country. We've actually had the pleasure of talking to advocates in other communities like Virginia and Kansas that are working on this issue too. And not only do they share some of the same hurdles and barriers that all of us face in working on this issue in Michigan, they also applauded a lot of the progress that we've made so far. And so I appreciate you and all the work that you do around the country.
Thank you so much, Jason. And I really would have liked to have been able to stay on a little longer, but I appreciate y'all, and I'm excited for the work that y'all are doing in Michigan. Please continue to keep it up, and definitely know that you always have our support with the national campaign. And I hope y'all have a great evening. Thank you so much for inviting me on this call.
Please rest. Please take care of yourself.
Thank you.
Okay, so Nicole, we recently had worked on a great project in Macomb County, supporting the court stakeholders as they looked at the use of juvenile court fines and fees, and there was a positive transformative reform there recently. Could you talk more about the steps that you and your county took to transform the juvenile justice system?
Sure. First, I wanted to give maybe just a slight history of collections and how it evolved over the years for the juvenile court. Originally, the reimbursement division, which is the division within now the juvenile court that is responsible for assessment and collections on juvenile cases. Originally, they were housed in the county finance department. So it was They're just in an accounting department. No connection to the youth and families we serve. These are people who know nothing of, and don't really come into contact with them other than around, the collections. It became evident that it should really be a court function. And so it was transferred from the executive branch underneath the court, but it got rolled into the adult collections division. So again, I think there's usually a different lens with how adults are treated with the court and what's supposed to happen in juvenile court. And so I think the collection practices were more of that, like it was just like, well, there's an assessment and they have to pay, and that is that. And again, not necessarily always the connection with the kids and the families that we serve. And in 2018, there was a shift and it was moved under the juvenile court. And I think the first thing we did, we had a discussion about, we were assessing costs, particularly the high cost of detention and residential placement unless you fell under the poverty guidelines, you were assessed the full amount. And that could, I mean, your staff interviewed some of the families impacted by that. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases. So, the first thing we did was we instituted a cap of $50 a day. You could never assess anyone more than $50 a day. Shortly after that cap was instituted, we were approached by MCYJ to work on this project together and take a look at our fines and fees and the impact that they're having. So we sort of broke it down into chunks of what we took a look at. And the first thing was looking at our assessment and our collection practices. What happens with a family? How are these fines and fees and costs assessed? What information are we getting from the families? How do we decide who gets a deferral, like a deferral where you don't have to pay now, but you'll still have to pay later? How is this information being even communicated to the families, and what is, their understanding? We took a look at the cost to collect. We have a whole reimbursement division with a handful of staff that are responsible for assessment and collection. And what were we bringing in compared to like what we were spending to collect? And it became evident pretty quickly that we were not collecting a lot. I think over a 5-year period, our collection rate was 7.2%. And most of that was on very old debt. And, we were reducing the kids that would be going out of home. And so therefore reducing the amount of assessments, which eventually we'd be spending more to collect it anyway. And then, we also took a look at what's the impact on the youth and families. And so that's where MCYJ was very helpful. They interviewed a number of families. I can't remember the exact number, but upwards of 20.
Yeah, I think around between 15 and 20.
And so interviewing the families and talking to them about what was their experience with the collections, and how has it impacted their lives. I think most of them did not understand that collections kept on going beyond their child's involvement in the court or beyond their child's 18th birthday, that this debt was going to be with them essentially for some of them for the rest of their life, because it was such a huge amount in their ability to pay. They could have been on a payment plan of $10 a month because that's all they could afford. So I would say those were the things that we looked at and putting them all together to paint a picture of like the overall impact in our county.
If I could add, I think that there was a couple of things that you said that I think were both rung true in Macomb in the conversations we had with the families, but then even broader in conversations that we've had with justice impacted youth and families, but also justice stakeholders as well, judges and court administrators and other communities. One, the impact that it has on families, that the ability for families to use funds for even positive pro-social activities for that young person or a sibling. That's at risk of being eliminated or greatly reduce their ability to do that. Two, the issue around what's actually being collected and the cost of collection, like we've heard that several times in talking with folks around the state, that when they actually look at what they're when they actually look at what they're collecting, that it often will cost more or close to what they're actually collecting. And if Miranda was here, I'm sure she'd say that that's what she's heard in other states as well. But the third thing that I'm curious about is the impact that it's had on the relationships between the youth and the families, or even your probation staff in engaging with young people. Often, when given pushback on this issue from some justice stakeholders, the argument has been that this charging families has been a tool that can make sure that they stay engaged or have skin in the game, basically. And what we've heard from families is that, again, like I said at the top, that it's actually a barrier to in full productive engagement with court staff. And even have heard families say that, you know, if there is a need where they want the juvenile court to intervene and do some additional work with their young person, that they're hesitant to share that information because it may cost the families more. And often the families who come in contact with the justice system are many of them have issues around family relationships or family dynamics that may have contributed to court involvement, and things like adding to their financial burden can exacerbate that. So around that positive impact piece, I'm curious if you can share, Nicole, some of the positive impacts that you've seen since Macomb made the change.
Yeah, I agree. I think people think that assessing the cost to these families, like it's about accountability, and they'll be more accountable maybe for what's happening in their home or for their child or whatever, if they have to pay for some of these services. And I think a lot of people do believe, and I might have been guilty, like even thinking some of that too, well, you have to assess something, right? But as we went through the process and hearing from the families and just you know, seeing talking to probation staff about what they experience and what they had experienced in the past, was when families figured out, like maybe their kid went into detention and they got their first bill and they didn't realize that it was going to cost as much as it costs. All of a sudden they have to weigh, can I live with this behavior because I can't afford to pay for another round of detention? What if my kid, if I report this negative behavior, what will happen? You know, I'll have to pay for, you know, pay the cost of the child having a behavior issue. And what we found is we no longer have those like parents debating, and then you get to a point where the kid's behavior could be so out of control when maybe we could have had an intervention earlier, but the parents were afraid that they would be saddled with the financial burden. And so we have probation talking about how parents are more engaged, there's more trust. You don't have that situation where they see the court as you know, a little adversarial with them because it's around money and assessment of fines and fees. I think that between the parent and the child, we've seen improved relationships. You don't have the parent blaming the child for now. Not only have you know, are you having these behavior problems, you've been, you know, maybe suspended from school, all of this, you've now cost me X number of dollars, those sorts of things. So for us, I think there's, you know, better rapport building with families, not having that barrier or that mistrust from the families around the costs that we would assess. And I think the jurists feel the same thing too. Nobody, you know, it was never a positive thing to feel like you were like you know, you're a collection agency. That just you know, it wasn't a good feeling for anybody. So I think we find better engagement from parents and from kids in the case plan. You know, less stress around the money issue with families that are already facing, you know, stress and having issues that they need to deal with. And so taking that out of the mix has just been huge for us.
Yeah, I was going to, I think I kind of jumped ahead and should have talked about process a bit more. But I did want to ask, because I know that there may be court stakeholders or just judges or folks that are considering making this reform or advocating locally to their local county commission or juvenile court to make a similar change. This was a process that we went through with the folks there, where there were some people who had early buy-in. I felt I would include you in that. And I think as it went along, the ultimate goal was to get the chief judge in support and the other powers that be to support it. What do you think was if there were any challenges to get full support for a bold progressive reform like you all took on to fully eliminate? What were those barriers, and how do you think that you were able to overcome them to get that full support to make the change in Macomb?
So I do want to take a minute and thank, like, our bench was very supportive. So all of our judges, family judges were fantastic, our chief judge too. And we were able to have these conversations with the county board of commissioners and with our county executive and got their full support. And I think the key was what we talked about, and I feel like I didn't go in depth enough, but the steps that we took. So it was getting a really bit, like, the full picture of what's happening. So it's talking about, like, how we assess and collect and what the families experience as they go through the front end sort of thing of having to produce all of this financial information and those kinds of things. And do they understand? Did we do a good job of explaining to them what they can expect? And it didn't seem like we did a great job, because a lot of them seemed very surprised when they got their first invoice or whatever statement saying what they owed, and taking a look at the cost to collect and how much time we were spending on that versus what we were actually bringing in, and then tying it into that human piece of how it really impacts the families. And so I think I can't thank MCYJ enough, because you guys did a lot of hard work and helped us with a lot of hard work and having to look in the mirror at ourselves on a, and really take a long, hard look at what we're doing and why we're doing it. And for us, I think getting that full picture was very helpful. And that I think Jen might have thrown in the chat the report that was generated from the project, like being able to take that to our stakeholders, our judges, and so they could get a real sense of what was happening. So it wasn't piecemeal. They had a real global look at beginning to end human impact, what it meant for our kids and families.
It was definitely one of the most enjoyable projects we worked on. It was like true collaboration between advocates and court stakeholders to make a transformative reform, and you all are the champions. I mean, we supported it, but it was not possible unless the local folks really bought into it and took it on, which you really did. Yeah, so Jen included the report that really highlights the entire process and a lot of the information about the Macomb County work in there. Final question before I get to the Q&A is, do you have any suggestions or advice for courts, and it could be Michigan, but there's also folks from out of state that are watching this as well, that are interested in exploring doing that self-assessment that Macomb did, and looking at the way that they handle juvenile court fines and fees. Do you have any suggestions on, like, someone at the starting point?
Yeah, I think if we had tried to tackle this on our own, MCYJ gave us a nice roadmap of how to proceed through how to look at it and procedurally what made sense. And so from doing this in-depth project together, we worked together on a DIY guide to self-assessment, a court self-assessment of your collection practices and their impact. And so I don't know if that's on your website or not, but I would say it was very helpful to have that process like laid out. It was pretty methodical. And I think if we hadn't had a nice roadmap, like what we had to do the assessment, I don't know that we would have, you know, gotten a real thorough picture of what our collection practices, what the impact really was. And so I think I would take a look at that as a starting point. It's a pretty nice guide, like step by step. Anyone who wants to reach out to me, I think my email address was in the information for the webinar. I'd be happy to talk to anybody who was interested. I think also for me, from the get-go, when we first met with MCYJ, was really, you know, getting my court administration engaged early, and, you know, just communicating a lot with the judges and court administration as we went along the way about the things we were learning. And, but again, having the nice report that I think the DIY, you could end up having like a very similar report at the end that you could share with judges and stakeholders and other people, and, you know, provide a good assessment to everybody of you know, your collection practices and recommendations based on what you learn.
Yes, exactly. So we did share in the chat both a link to the Macomb County project and the DIY guide that Nicole highlighted. She did an excellent job vetting that and co-authoring it. And it has it's been shared with court administrators around Michigan. But also, again, it's been a resource that's been shared with advocates and folks in other states too, who are looking at doing this work, and there's been a lot of excitement around it. So again, thank you for all that you contributed to the Debt-Free Justice campaign. Do you any final remarks before I get to Q&A?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I may but
all right, so I think, I mean, we may end up wrapping up early because we had to lose Miranda, unfortunately, but I'll get to the questions and answers. Please add any questions that you may have in the Q&A box. So the first one is, can you share your thoughts and suggestions on how to approach a different county where we seek similar reform, but where the financial incentive is not as strong because other counties may have been more successful in recovering fees? What arguments should we emphasize and what strategy should we use? How might the threat of litigation impact these efforts? I can take a stab at it and you can contribute, Nicole,
Sure.
if you'd like.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, you know, hopefully local jurisdictions can avoid litigation or lawsuits, but it may impact folks or cause them to look at their system a bit more deeply. I think for those arguments about for counties that may have been more successful in recovering fees, what we try to do is advocate and talk about the human impact, the impact that it has on families, that it's actually counterproductive if your goal is to be a treatment, rehabilitative, restorative court. And that in the long term, even though you may be recouping some costs from justice system involvement, you may be contributing to long-term system involvement or deeper financial need from the youth and families by charging these funds. That if your goal is to help young people thrive, have good outcomes while they go through the process of court involvement and after, the focus should be 100% on treatment, accountability for their actions, but resolving the issues that brought them in so that they can successfully move on. Anything to add, Nicole?
Yeah, I think again, I think the human impact and again, looking at how it impacts the families is huge. Also, we the way we've worded, we waive those fees from the get-go for families. So it's a fee waiver, which we are able to do legally. So that is, we waive them and we've discharged the old debt. That's a review that's gone, like each case, it's not like you can do a blanket discharge of old debt. It's a case by case. You have to separate out, restitution. It's time intensive, but yeah, we do waive it on the front end right now because there is an obligation, to make an assessment of what the family is going to be responsible for. So we waive the attorney fees and cost of care, and we don't assess probation fees. That's not a requirement, so we don't do it. And then yeah, so I would say that would be like just legally how we looked at it was just a waiver out of the gate. But again, I think sometimes too, when other people talk, they're like, well, we don't have a whole division that does reimbursement, all of our collections. We have like staff doing multiple things, but there's still staff time put into that. So I guess I would really look at like doing the math and factoring that into us. It was a surprise. I mean, we were still clearing 7.2% of 84 million, over five, like collecting whatever over 5 years, like when you broke it down, that of course 7.2 was after all of our expenses and all of those things. But I mean, it was still a chunk of change, but I think then you factored in so you hear the 7.2%, we had collection agencies that weren't even interested in working with us because it's such a nominal return rate. And I think then adding the human impact into that, it was like, even though, yes, we are, bringing in some money, is it really worth it? And for us, we felt like it wasn't.
Thank you. The next question is, has Ms. Faulds talked with her counterpart in Washtenaw County about this issue?
I have talked to Washtenaw County. Now, Washtenaw does not assess, my understanding, Washtenaw and Wayne do not assess cost of care.
Correct.
Right, which is huge. So shout out to them. They were doing it way before we got on board, but I don't know about any of their other collection practices.
Yeah, I know for a fact that Wayne, I do think that Washtenaw does assess some costs. They also have an income waiver process too, or a waiver process too.
Okay.
Wayne does not charge anything. They don't charge attorney fees or others as well. And so I ultimately think that's why statute change is important at the statewide level, because it's, even as much as we and other people who support our work will advocate for reforms in every county, it's impossible to do that work to make statewide change. And then there's also state law that, like you were saying, requires courts to assess and seek reimbursement from families for certain expenditures, especially around the cost of care. And so that was one of the next questions, was what were some of the reasons folks were against the change, and how did you help convince them? Otherwise, in addition to a lot of the things we talked about around engagement and skin in the game, and those who do bring in some revenue from it, there was some concern that, hey, the state law currently requires us to seek that reimbursement. And so, in addition to all the responses that we gave to those previous concerns, for that one, we said, support the legislative reform. If that is your concern, and that's what we've been sharing with legislators too, is that we have talked to plenty of courts and court stakeholders who are interested in making this reform and even doing it on their own, but are concerned with being on the incorrect side of that law, and that the statewide change would help that. What were some? Oh, I already asked that question or answered that question. So, so your county doesn't charge any fees, but what does your state require?
So we waive cost of care. We do not charge probation fees. We do not pass along attorney fees. There is a state minimum cost that is required, and it depends. It's I don't want to, I'll get my numbers wrong, but it's a little bit lower. I think it's around $48 per adjudicated misdemeanor, and 65, 67, somewhere in that range for a felony. And then there's a crime victim rights fee per adjudication, and that's $25. So we do assess those. And then restitution, if there's any restitution owed, the court will take a look at restitution requests and will order restitution, and that is not waivable, dischargeable, that is something. But that restitution is an easier thing to talk to a kid and a family about. It's, it's about restorative justice. It's like, there was this, and so how do we accomplish that? And, I think our court wants to make victims whole for sure, but keeps restitution reasonable, and it is an important part of what we do. So those are the areas where we still do assess some type of cost to the family.
Sure. And I should clarify too that the legislation that we highlighted earlier, the House bills, they too mirror exactly the reforms that Macomb made. So eliminates a lot of the discretionary fees that we were talking about, but maintains, because it's by law, those state required fees, those state mandated costs, which again are small compared to the other fees that young families can be charged, that can also be reoccurring. I mean, we've heard stories of young people who are charged attorney fees for every single hearing that they attend, and some young people require out-of-home placement multiple times, and so they're being charged not only by the length of time that they're placed in placement, but how many times they're placed out of it. So I was off by one number. So the House bills are 4987 through 4991. And again, bipartisan bill package, and it's awaiting a hearing in the House Judiciary Committee. And then also the state legislation also does still include restitution. So final question we have. So I think I got it. Yeah, okay. There was one additional question in the chat for Nicole. Can she share thoughts or any arguments or perspectives that were effective to sway those who may have not been on board? What thoughts do both of us have on the use of litigation in these efforts? So again, I spoke to litigation. I think it could be a powerful tool. I always advocate for there to be some other solution to resolve issues, so though it's not needed. But this is a concern for us that families are being harmed or impacted by that, and so it could lead to that in some situations. I'm not sure if Miranda was on, she could talk about if that's been a strategy deployed in other states, but it always is. It could be a possibility if there's clients and there's willing litigators. But our hope is that either counties will mirror the reforms that Macomb has made, or the statewide legislation will pass, and we can reform the entire state as a whole.
Yeah, I would say I was part of, when we were working on this project, one thing I was surprised about is that kids do have attorneys, and the attorneys, I don't think our attorneys were super familiar with our collection practices. So we didn't experience a lot of families through their attorneys, or kids through their attorneys, looking to challenge any, costs that were assessed to them. So that was kind of interesting. I think, again, I can't stress enough going through the full process when you're talking about trying to persuade maybe some that have an original idea that like it shouldn't happen, or there should be some sort of buy-in from the family, financial, buy-in. I think going through the whole process, looking at the big picture, and really taking the time to interview families and talk to them about the impact and how it's impacted their lives. One of the things I didn't mention that was one of our collection practices, and I think is pretty common, I would say, across the state, was tax intercepts. So one of our collection practices was to intercept state income taxes. So we actually got a lot of money through that process, but these were families that like they needed their tax refund to get caught up on bills, to make sure, like, this was something they relied on, and then sort of they felt like out of the blue we swooped in and took something from them. And so I think looking at every portion of it and how it impacts them and what their side might be is really important. I think, you know, even we have heard people talk about caps and things like that. If the families that get the deepest into the system, I find, are experiencing multiple issues and sometimes, you know, maybe not the most stable financially. And so this just puts another burden on them. But again, the human impact actually seemed to be the most persuasive in my county.
Yeah, one of the arguments that we made against caps actually was that, you know, especially if you're a community or jurisdiction that is losing money or coming close
Right.
on what you're bringing in versus the cost of operating the reimbursement division or the collection process, is that once you place those caps, even if it's well-meaning, of course, we would argue go all the way. You actually put yourself in a deeper hole with that imbalance of cost of collection versus revenue. So it's like if you're planning to make that change, you might as well go all the way through with it. Is our perspective. Looks like the final question is for us is MCYJ requesting that the state drop fees. So the state mandated costs, the victim rights fund, restitution, those are all things that it was made clear to us that the legislature wasn't going to move on, even if the other things are taken up. And some of it was the arguments that Nicole made about making victims whole and repairing harm. And so we're focused on those discretionary costs, which I would throw in, even though it's state mandated to a certain extent, the cost of care of services. That's where you're seeing families the most harm and most impacted. It's by those costs, attorney fees costs, and the things that impact community-based care. And I think that if there are communities doing creative things around addressing restitution. In Washington, where we are currently, there's a program that pays young people a wage. I don't know if it's already underway or being developed, but to pay young people a wage for participating in community service that can then that those funds are used to pay off restitution. There's other communities in the state that do that as well. But our focus has been squarely on addressing those costs that are related to the interactions with the court specifically. We feel like, especially for out-of-home care, young people shouldn't be in out-of-home care, away from home or their community schools, et cetera, unless they absolutely have to be. And that's something that the state is constantly working on. Who should be in placement and who shouldn't be, what's the length of stay, what services, et cetera. And again, because of our justice by geography, there are kids who can do the same offense, have the same mistake that can lead to a probation violation in one community, and have alternatives where they're still at home and community-based care that's more effective or cheaper, and in another community, or there can be placed in placement and charged for it. And so that unfairness is the thing that we're squarely focused on addressing in the system. Any last questions from the audience? I'll give a couple seconds. Again, please check out all the resources in the chat. Look at that link, the take action link on the House bills. There is an email template that you can fill out and sign, and it'll send an email to all of the members of the House Judiciary Committee, asking them to hold a hearing and support the legislation. One question in the chat was, does the included links include how the debt has been assessed and removed by accounting? I don't think so, especially not the Macomb report. We also have a larger report that we can send out to the attendees later, that our partners, the National Center for Youth Law, did a statewide assessment on juvenile court fines and fees that can give a really good overview of how the system works statewide and the differences and the disparities as well. That could add a lot of information. Please, in addition to checking out all of the links and reaching out to the legislators, reach out to your own individual legislator, ask them to support this legislation. And then please check out our website. Once you go there, miyouthjustice.org, you can sign up for our newsletter, get additional information about the work that we're doing, updates on the Debt-Free Justice Campaign. But our website has all of the media and additional educational materials around this issue and the other work that the Michigan Center for Youth Justice is working on. So want to thank you all for attending. You're going to get a half an hour back from our planned event. Thanks to Miranda Sheffield for participating to the best she could. Thank you, Nicole, for all the work that you do. You all should know that she's a champion and an advocate for various reforms, not just debt-free justice. She's been there with us on Raise the Age and advocating for record confidentiality. So we feel like we have a strong partner in Nicole. So thank you again for all that you do.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks a lot, everyone. We will be sending out a recording of this event, and in addition to all the links and materials soon. Hope you all have a good evening. Happy Halloween, free Halloween, and talk to you soon. Thank you.